a quarterback that had a heck of a year. We're now joined again by Brian Murphy, WRAL, in Raleigh, North Carolina. And Brian, thanks for your time. So we went over kind of the story from the Board of Governors, UNC, NC State, et cetera. And first of all, again, we do appreciate it. I know you've been doing a lot of cut-ins with TV too. Was this posturing? Was this something? Where's the meat on the bone with today's, I guess you could say, decision?
Yeah, I think, the system president and the board, I think they just want to be aligned. They want everyone to have to be aligned with them and them to be aligned where they're the decision-making body. They have the oversight over all 16 campuses that are in the system. That includes UNC and NC State. I mean, it'll be interesting to see if there ever comes a time and where one school wants to go to the Big Ten or the SEC and when UNC might have that opportunity, but NC State doesn't, what they'll do in that situation. But this will just give them that power to veto a move if they decide it's not financially viable.
Brian, this does not, though, it protects NC State a little bit because NC State's not the one you really have to worry about, but it's just not like a complete, shield against anything, because if they decide that it's best for UNC to go, they're still going to vote that way, aren't they?
Right. It doesn't say, the language doesn't say the teams can never be split up. They could not, they could have passed something like that, but they didn't. This is, and it hasn't gotten to the full board yet. A committee passed it today. A full board should hear it next month. But this basically says you got to come and present us with all the financials. What's it going to cost you to leave? What's it going to cost you to join? What's it going to cost you to build up your facilities to be competitive in that league? And so that will have to be submitted to the system president. If the system president says you can go, then the board will get a chance to decide whether it wants to vote yes or no. So it's more of a check than it's more of a veto power than something saying you guys can't do it. But it'll be interesting if and when that time comes, how that power gets used.
Brian, it seems like there's been a lot of beating of the war drums, getting ready for a major shift coming out of Tallahassee, as you well know, for these last few months. And there's been kind of a little bit coming out of North Carolina. Is it getting louder? Is the drums starting to get a little bit steadier? Or is this still very much a kind of a quieter time and there's a long way to go in the ramp up here?
I don't think UNC wants to leave the ACC. I think if they had their way, they would stay. As long as the money is, I think they can deal with a little bit of a gap. And as long as the ACC remains viable, certainly their path to the college football playoff is much easier. So I don't think that UNC wants to leave. They're not in the same boat as Florida State, where they feel like there's an existential crisis to their athletic department if they don't leave the ACC. I think UNC would prefer to stay, but if things were to change to the level where it's no longer viable for them to stay in the ACC, then I think they would consider it. I mean, I think the backdrop to all of this is how much money is it going to cost to leave the ACC, and when you get out, where you're going to go. But also, say it takes you 3 years, 4 years to get out. What does the college landscape look like then? Mm-hmm. Has everything changed once again? So you're gonna spend all this political capital, you're going to spend all this money to get out of a league, and then find out, oh wait, the top 32 teams have moved off into their own subdivision. So I think that the times are so uncertain that maybe it makes sense to kind of ride this out and see where we are. What happens with employment? What happens with NIL? What happens with Charlie Baker's idea of a new top tier? What happens with employment? Do they have to be paid? Do the college athletes have to be paid? I think there's just so many issues that right now it kind of makes sense to bide your time and save that political capital, save that money, quite frankly.
Brian, do you think that like with UCLA and Cal, UCLA has to send a stipend or whatever you want to call it to Cal because they're going to make so much money in the Big Ten and how it hurt Cal? Could that, let's just say it does occur and NC State's left out of it. Would there be any of that, like a revenue stream to NC State from UNC?
Yeah, hypothetically. I mean, that's not something that's been discussed at this point, but certainly I think this state, the members of the board certainly looked at what happened in other states. I think Oregon, Kansas, California, some states have tried to pass, law is probably not the right word, but things to keep the schools together. They haven't really held up, but I certainly could see if NC State were being left behind, if the ACC were being dismantled, if they were having to join another league that paid even less, I could certainly see the board making some decisions to try to help them out. What's interesting is they have lumped NC State and UNC together in a lot of different ways. Certainly, they're the two biggest schools in the state. They have the biggest budgets. But, for example, they just passed sports gambling here. Every athletic department in the state, except for UNC and UNC and NC State, is going to receive money from the tax revenue that comes from that. So they have separated UNC and NC State in some ways from the rest of the schools in the system. That makes sense. They're the largest, but it will be interesting to see what happens if one of those schools was about to be harmed.
Brian, I asked, we had a Louisville columnist on yesterday. We have you on today. Do you feel that the ACC, save for the ones who want Florida State to win, like maybe Clemson, so they can follow suit, are the schools individually are mad at FSU, or do they understand?
I think they understand. I mean, I think they're all professionals in this business. They know what's happening. I think a school like North Carolina, for example, certainly would have options in a way that maybe a Wake Forest wouldn't. And so, they probably have a different opinion of the matter. I think what's interesting is, if Florida State is able to leave, how much money do they owe? And is that distribution, enough to keep the other schools happy? Do they owe $500 million? Do they owe $700 million? What do they owe? And would, if two schools were to leave, and they each had to pay $500 million. Now you're talking about $1 billion to distribute among your other members. So I think some schools are kind of taking that wait and see approach. Like, okay, well, if Florida State were to leave, but that were to mean that, an extra $100 million for us or something like that. So I think they're all treating it like a business. I think there are certainly hard feelings, I think probably at the ACC office, but I think all the schools kind of understand what's going on and realize that if they were at a different school, they might have a different opinion of the whole matter.
So is this just part of yet another, check the box of what has to happen for everyone to have their ducks in a row whenever something eventually does happen? Yeah.
I mean, I think, if you watched what happened in California, and I'm sure you guys did closely, they were caught totally off guard by UCLA leaving. They had to kind of scramble after the fact, find out if they even had jurisdiction over the matter. It was a long process. It took, several months for the board to figure out what they wanted to do. I think this is a board here in North Carolina that says, hey, this is a problem that could be coming down the pike. Let's get in front of it. Let's get in front of this issue. Let's figure out what this board is responsible for versus what the individual boards at each campus are responsible for. It's part of a larger aligning with the Board of Governors, kind of trying to take back some power from the individual institutions and say, we never really granted you authority over this issue or over this issue. So we're going to take some of that power back. So some of it, I think, is pre-planning. Some of it is part of a larger issue of this board trying to figure out what it's responsible for and what the individual institutions are responsible for.
Brian, thank you very much. I know it's been a busy day for you, and appreciate you making room for us. We appreciate your time. We'll talk to you down the road.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks
Brian
for having
Murphy, WRAL Television, covers North Carolina and Raleigh, and the story today that we discussed earlier in also the show. Hey,